Madam President, yesterday I came down to the floor to talk about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and to discuss how we're going to get out of this mess. And I pointed out the President's disappointing record when it comes to these debt issues. The President originally requested a clean debt ceiling increase that didn't have any spending reductions attached to it. He then submitted a budget that failed to ever balance, and this budget didn't include the recommendations from the Simpson-Bowles Commission that he had appointed to come up with some suggestions about how to put our country on a more sustainable fiscal path. According to the Congressional Budget Office, his budget didn't even meet his metric of primary balance, which is balancing the budget not including interest costs. Well, after realizing that House Republicans were the only ones with a plan to balance our budget and pay down the debt, President Obama decided to give a speech. Of course, it was just a speech. It did not include numbers. He didn't resubmit his budget to Congress despite requests to do so. He just gave a speech. And as they say, Madam President, talk is cheap. We need action. The only action he's promised, though, is that he will veto plans that would do something to address our debt and deficit problem. Earlier this month, the administration issued a veto threat for the Cut, Cap, and Balance bill. This was a reasonable proposal that immediately cut spending, put a cap on spending, and would have raised the debt limit after a balanced budget amendment was approved by the Congress. In fact, this was so reasonable that according to a CNN poll, 66% of the people in this country supported this plan. This bill garnered the support of 234 members of the House of Representatives, including 5 Democrats. But Senate Democrats voted to table the bill after this veto threat was issued by the President. So Speaker Boehner in the House of Representatives unveiled yet another plan. It certainly isn't perfect, but it begins to deal with our spending problem while also increasing the debt limit to provide a period of time for Congress to pass more substantial budget savings. Unfortunately, the administration issued a veto threat for this bill. Their reasoning? It doesn't extend the debt limit past the election. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out why. It's not because the markets require a longer-term increase. They don't. It's not because Congress generally approves long-term increases in the debt limit. We don't. It's not because a long-term increase would force us to cut more spending. It wouldn't. It's because the President has to face re-election next year. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a political consideration, not an economic one. So after months of fear-mongering about the risk of not raising our debt limit, the President would actually veto a bill because it casts him in a bad political light. Madam President, this is unacceptable. Tomorrow, I am hopeful that the House of Representatives will pass the Boehner bill, and I'm hopeful that as soon as we receive it here in the United States Senate, we'll take it up, pass it, and send it to the President for his signature. We need to do it not just for the debt limit increase, which we do, but we also need to do it to start cutting spending and creating a process to reform entitlement programs. Already our economy is feeling the impact of these debts and deficits. We know from the Reinhardt and Rogoff study that our economy is already growing at 1 percentage point less than it should be because of our debt. This is costing us about 1 million jobs every single year. And if we don't take action to cut spending, we know what our future holds. Downgrades, interest rate increases, austerity programs filled with tax hikes and draconian spending cuts, and anemic economic growth. Looking at Europe right now, Ireland pays 12.9% interest on 3-year bonds. Portugal pays 19.4%, and Greece pays an astounding 28.9%. These rates would truly bankrupt our country in short order. Unfortunately, as former Bush economic advisor and Federal Reserve Board Governor's member Larry Lindsey pointed out in a Wall Street Journal op-ed recently, and then again reiterated yesterday at a Finance Committee hearing, even a normalization of interest rates in the United States to their historical average for the past 20 years would add $4.9 trillion to our projected debt over the next 10 years. Madam President, we can't afford the spending that we have now, let alone this additional interest. We need to start cutting spending now. Both the Cut, Cap, and Balance Plan and the Boehner Plan would do this. We also need to create a process to reform entitlements. The Cut, Cap, and Balance Plan does this by capping spending, and the Boehner Plan does this through a new joint committee that has a firm deadline for congressional action yet this year. I wish I could say, Madam President, there was a plan by the President that does this. There isn't. And that's why we here in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives are going to have to take the leadership in this debate. The President obviously has decided that this is more about politics and unfortunately has not stepped up and provided the leadership that's necessary to get our country back on a sustainable fiscal path. And as a consequence, we are where we are, facing a few days from now a deadline where we will have to increase the borrowing authority of this country. And what I would submit to my colleagues, Madam President, is that the issue and the challenge and the problem in front of us is not the debt limit, it is the debt. If we don't do something about this debt, we are going to bankrupt this country. We are going to see the kinds of interest rates that they're seeing in Europe. We're going to see anemic economic growth in this country, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get people back to work. So cutting spending, getting our fiscal house in order, making government smaller, not larger, making the government economy smaller and the private economy larger is the way that we need to get this country back on track. But it starts by having a plan that puts our fiscal house in order. And so we, in the next few days, are going to have a chance to vote yet again on a plan put forward by the House of Representatives because the President has failed to put forward a plan. And I hope, Madam President, that our colleagues here in the United States Senate will do the right thing for this country and start to get us on that pathway that will enable us to get past the short-term challenges that we face, get us to an opportunity to vote on a balanced budget amendment, which I think is desperately needed in this country, that would put the kind of fiscal discipline in place for the long term so that we aren't having these year-over-year $1.5 trillion deficits that continue to accumulate more and more debt and put this country at greater risk and the future generations in greater jeopardy. So I would hope that my colleagues will support a responsible plan that actually does cut spending, actually does address the issue of entitlement reform, does it without raising taxes, and make sure that come next Tuesday we've taken the action that's necessary to protect our economy, shield it from any adverse impacts that could occur as a result of us not raising our debt limit, but do it in a way that addresses the fundamental issue here, which is not the debt limit, but the debt. Madam President, I yield the floor.